Hello. Welcome, or thanks for sticking around. My name is Allison Wilson. I'm the Chief Engagement Officer here in KDHX. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to help facilitate the telling of these stories. A few months ago, I found myself chatting with Ron Edwards late into the night, and for those of you that know Ron, you know how easy that is to do. He was telling me all these wild stories about the beginnings of KDHX, and it was a real moment of inspiration for me. As probably all of you know, this is our 30th birthday year, and we've been thinking a lot about this illustrious history that we have, and where we are today, and where we want to go. So hearing those stories from Ron really gave me a new perspective on the sort of passion and commitment that it took to get KDHX off the ground and then keep it going for 30 years. And I think it ignited in me in a new way a sort of fire for KDHX, and an understanding that for those of us that are here now or are still here, it's up to us to carry that flame into the future. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if everyone could hear these stories, and if everyone could hear that passion and commitment and help me carry that flame. So that's what we're here to do tonight. Thank you so much for being here. And we're going to kick things off with a video, and then I'll bring on our esteemed storytellers. Sound good? All right.
It was October 1987. The engineers, Brian Costello, David Ballinger, Paul Neuenkirk, Matt Castigar, Eric von Schroeder, Chris Neuenkirk had been down at the transmitter site in, we called it LA Lower Arnold, for 2 weeks trying to get the Larkin transmitter up and running, get the exciter to work, and actually get us on the air because we were facing a FCC deadline. And October 1st came, and they're like, we're going to do it. October 2nd came, we're going to do it. October 3rd came, we're going to do it. And they kept having trouble, and it just wasn't going as fast as they wanted. So October 14th of 87, the call went around to a bunch of us, and they said, tonight's the night. It's really, really going to happen. And we said, sure, right. But my father believed it and gave us a bunch of champagne. So Gail Needles and Susie Gray and I drove down to the transmitter with champagne, parked our cars, tuned all the radios to 88.1, and then waited about 4 hours while they were still dorking with the transmitter to get it up and get it up. And we decided, a year before, what our very first record would be. And so that was queued up, getting dusty on the turntable. We had turntables back then. Banu Gibson Radio was the name of the song. And they had it queued. Gail and Susie and I were outside. The guys were all inside doing their engineering thing. And all of a sudden, on all the car radios parked outside the transmitter shack,
radio, remember radio. We'd sit and close our eyes and use our imagination. Comedy, mystery, a fireside chat. Together we sat, listening nightly to our favorite show. Radio, why did you ever go? Oh, won't you please come back and entertain us? Oh, I long to turn the dial again, to hear the person smile again. Radio, I miss you so.
we started screaming, hollering, crying. And then people started coming to the site. There were folks who'd also, driving around St. Louis, had their radio tuned to 88.1 for weeks. And one guy was coming home from Memphis and almost drove off Highway 55. He's like, he couldn't believe it. But everybody knew that it was because they knew what we were going to play. And people started just showing up at the site at 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the morning going, oh my God, we finally did it, after they'd started in 1972 to put the station on the air. It took 15 years. So it was really, really, really fun. And then everybody was so psyched that a couple of guys, the engineers were exhausted. Another guy from New York named Jeff Ryder said, I want to stay up all night and do radio. Now that we're on the air, let's not turn it off, even though we've done the test and everything's fine. And from that moment, by the next morning, there were people showing up with records going, we'll keep it on the air. And we did 24/7 from that moment on.
Amos and Andy, I long to turn the dial again, to hear the person smile again. Radio, I miss you, sonio, bonio, donio, do. Radio, I miss you so.
Thank you. Susan's here. Thank you, Susan, for sharing that story at our 25th birthday. I'm going to bring up our storytellers now. Paul Stamler, better known as Pablo Meshiuggi, with no time to tarry here. Going for it. Steve Pick, Sound Salvation. We've got Art Dwyer of Blues in the Night. And Ron Edwards of Nothing But the Blues. So I'd like to start it off by just asking each of you how and why you got involved with KDHX in the first place.
I guess I'll start. I had been involved with KDNA, which was the precursor station to KDHX, which it broadcast from an old house down in Gaslight Square. And I had fallen in love with community radio at that point. I read Lorenzo Milam's book, Sex and Broadcasting, which had nothing to do with sex, but he put that in the title to sell it. And it was all about community radio, and I just got hooked, and I still remain hooked. And people were starting to have meetings around town on the south side, mostly in churches, to organize for a new radio station that would be owned by the parent company of KDNA, which was Double Helix. And this guy talked me into coming, and I basically started going to meetings and got myself on the technical committee with the anticipation that I would be doing not a radio show, but live tapes of concerts to broadcast on the station. I did a few of those too. I recorded John Cage's 433, if you happen to know that piece. It didn't make it on the air. Because at the time I had only analog recorders, and that piece doesn't work in analog. It requires digital to really capture its essence. So anyhow, a week after it went on the air, and I was driving down the road and heard a banjo on 88.1, and I said, it's got to be that. And Susie Gray called me up that week and said, do you think you can do an air shift? I said, well, I know a little about folk music. And that's how it started.
Well, I remember in the early 80s, everybody would mumble about this double helix thing, and nobody really told me what it was exactly. But somehow or another, I heard it was going to do radio. Now, I always wanted to do radio because in 1979, I picketed Keishi. They weren't playing enough new wave, so I actually went down there and picketed them. And so I thought that I could do a better job than what was going on commercial radio. So a few years after that, Cat Pick and I did a TV show for Double Helix. We got involved in that. And that's interesting because she wasn't Cat Pick then. She was married to someone else. But we were co-hosts of a fine TV show called the Jet Lag Video Hour. And in that led me to knowing more about what Double Helix was. And then Tom Ray, who was my boss at the time, invited me to a meeting. And then there were meetings and meetings and meetings and a few more meetings and then some meetings. And eventually, at the end of one of the meetings, I got on the air, but I'll tell you that story later. So that's basically how I found out.
Michael Donahue was in one of those pictures that the video was on the video, and I barely knew Michael. I knew him from going to various musical functions around St. Louis, and he was always at these shows, and we got to know each other. And I don't know how he got my phone number or anything like that, but he called me up one day and he goes, why don't you come on out here on Richardson Road? We got a radio station that we're gonna start up, and we gotta get this tower thing worked out, so bring some tools. And by the way, bring some records. I don't know what a combination that is. And that was for the next 18 months out there on that hill. It was always an adventure getting to the top of the hill, especially when the weather was bad, you know, because there was ruts on both sides of the road. And my car, well, you know. But I want to mention two friends I haven't seen in a long time, Susan Littlefield and Gail Needles. And when I would, over the years, in those early years, when we got out of the tower area and in over on Magnolia, when I would look at you two, I always knew that this is part of the backbone of KDHX, these two women right here in the front row. So I just want to say that.
Well, I guess I'm echoing that because I'd known Susan for many years, going back into the 60s when we went to school together and then worked at the art department. And I knew Brian Costello also. And she had told me about this during the 7th game of the World Series when the Cardinals won in 1982 and was talking about this radio station. And I said, I'd be interested in doing that. That would be something worth putting some time into. After that, I was one of the founders of the St. Louis Blues Society, and we had found that we had been working since '84 on trying to publicize blues events in St. Louis as a nonprofit, but commercial radio would not allow you to get on, and some friends helped us out, but you had to pay for advertising. And when the station came along, I thought this is the most perfect vehicle because we will support the musicians in St. Louis in every genre. There'll be musicians on this station, but we won't have to pay anybody to talk about how great these artists are and how great the St. Louis musicians perform on a regular basis. And this would be the perfect vehicle. And I found out one day when Tom Ray called me up and said, what are you doing on your show this Sunday? And I said, what show? Nobody said anything. He said, you're on right in front of me. I said, okay. So I said, I'll wait. I'll get back with you. And then Brian called me a little bit later, and I said, yeah, I heard I'm on Sunday nights. He said, yeah, that'll work out for you because that's the only day I was free. And the two of you will be back and back, you know. I said, okay, well, give me a couple of weeks to get something together because it was a little soon. I went out there, and as with all of us, we simply walked in. There was no training. I watched the guy in front of me for 20 minutes, and then went live on the air. And I said, Brian, what was this? There was no training. He said, I don't worry about you. You're a tech guy. You do that for a living, you know? You'd figure it out. I wasn't going to come out there just to show you. So that is basically how it started. And this whole group of people, there were about 35 shows, I think, and a number of people doing double shifts. Steve did 2 programs. Art was doing Monday and Friday drive times. We didn't have all the programming we have today, and we didn't quite run into the night. Susie Gray's kids would come at midnight on Sunday, and the station stopped when they left. When they got tired, let's close up, let's go. And we'd start over again. But it was an absolutely incredible experience. You'll hear some more about that. But each of us got involved by knowing certain people that were involved in this production. And it's about volunteerism, because if we hadn't known these people, none of us would have been involved in this. And over the years, we wouldn't have worked so hard on it. But we knew that the people that told us about this were people of real substance and people that we were our friends and that we believed in. And we're going to do something as best as we could do it. So.
All right, thank you, guys. We're gonna hear from a couple other people throughout the night via video. So, Andy, you want to go ahead and?
Yeah, hi, my name's Chuck Lavazzi. I'm the Senior Performing Arts Critic at KDHX right now. And I've been other things in the past, but that's what I am right now. The first meeting I recall was Brian Costello, who was our first station manager, and a group of maybe a dozen other volunteers. They were meeting in some little room on Arsenal somewhere, some meeting room, and they were talking about the plans to put this new public radio station on the air. So I got involved with them from the get-go, working on the planning stages. Not too long after that, it finally got to the point where things were being built. I remember that it was like, well, who wants to do a show? Okay, I'll do a show. What kind of show would you like to do? I mean, that's how it worked, really. And I said, okay, I'll do one on Monday and I'll do one on Sunday afternoon. Okay, fine. That was the process. That was about it, because there were only about a dozen of us originally. That's how I ended up running the Performing Arts Department as well, because one of the things I said to Brian when we went on the air was, look, I'm not happy about the state of theater and film reviewing in this town. The people who are, back then, this is again 1988, the people who were doing theater reviews were people who had no practical theater experience. I'd had lots of it. I'd been an actor since I was in college, and before that I was an amateur magician, so I had a lot of stage time behind me at that point, and I said, I would like to start doing theater reviews on KDHX, and I'd like to go out and recruit people who actually are actors and directors and designers to do this. He said, fine, go ahead. So I did. So I went out and started recruiting people, and that's how that got started. And then later I added classical music. And then I forget how I got in touch with Diane Carson, who's our principal film reviewer. She probably emailed me. And so that set all that up. But yeah, basically in those days it was like if you wanted to do something, unless it was completely insane, you would just go ahead and do it.
Tom Paparay with 88.1 KDHX, 30-year volunteer and on-air personality at the River City's best radio station. I was contacted at my record store by Brian Costello, who walked in and introduced himself, and he revealed the plans for KDHX and wanted to know if I might consider doing a show. My first trip to LA, Lower Arnold, was very, very rural, and as I drove along the unpaved Razorback rutted road to the top of the hill, I was thinking, man, I hope I don't run off the road. Well, it was hot in the summer. It was not particularly comfortable at any time. Like I said, you felt like you were doing something illegal in Central Europe in about 1955. And, there you were doing a radio show basically at the foot of this pretty considerable tower right alongside the generators. It kind of gave it an industrial sheen. I wouldn't say it's an erotic place. So what I noticed was that after the first couple of months, I would glow in the dark on the way home in the car.
I'm curious if any of you experienced that as well, glowing in the dark.
One thing that Brian had described to me, I said, "What's this like?" He said, "Well, we're going to go out to the tower for about 6 months." And he said, "It's kind of like South American radio." I said, "What are you talking about? Is this like Wolfman Jack?" He said, "Yeah, it's kind of." I said, "Do I need to be armed?" The Wolfman Jack, people were shooting at him and stuff like that. But he said, "No, because we don't have a building. We have to do this, and we'll go out to this site." And I measured it was 62 miles round trip for me. Most of us were, Art said it was even more for him. But the thing about the site itself is that when you came off the major roads, if you didn't know the exact way to get to this tower, you could see it, but you couldn't figure out how to get there. And the road, it looked to me, it was a gravel road that looked like it was somebody's driveway. I was convinced the first night that I was going to end up in somebody's backyard as I drove by their house, and the description was, "Turn left at the break in the weeds." And it's in the interview. And that's exactly what I did, and that was exactly the directions. Where the weeds broke, you made a left, and like Tom said, you had to gun the car to get up over the top of that hill. And none of us had good cars, ever. I never saw a new car at KDHX at that tower, ever. But you'd get over the top of that hill, and then suddenly you could see it. It was just a wide open gravel area with the building and this great big tower behind it. And there was no fencing, nothing. You just drove right up to the door, plenty of parking. And just a small wooden building. It had a portable john right to the left of the door, and it had a 100-watt bulb over the door, and that was it. And the door was closed. And believe me, on Sunday nights, that door was locked. I always thought, I'd hear the knock on the door. I always thought there's two choices. It's Tom Ray or it's a bear. It always turned out to be Tom Ray.
Luckily, yeah. So that was a pretty good description. We got a video that also describing it a little bit. We got a cue.
And you go up on some little local road, and then an even smaller road, and then a dirt road, and then up to the top of a hill where there would be this shack that held the transmitter. And inside the shack was this little closet where we would broadcast. And it was about half the size of the air room we have now here at the station. For people who have not seen that, it's not huge. Well, this was tiny. And inside this little tiny room, we had, I think, as I recall, 2 turntables and 1 or 2 cassette decks and a mixing board that looked like it had come from a pirate radio station in South America in 1950. I mean, the thing was ancient. It had these big plastic knobs that you would shove up and down and 2 VU meters, and that was it. And that's how we broadcast. We had, I think, maybe 1 or 2 mics. We probably had 2 mics, because some people did have co-hosts. And it was primitive. It was hotter than hell in the summer. It was really cold in the winter. There was obviously no restroom. It was a transmitter shack, so there was a porta potty outside, which in the winter was a real adventure.
So I think y'all are painting a vivid picture. This place was isolated, right? So Steve, I believe you have a story of your first day on the air, being out there all by yourself.
Yeah, well, let me just start real quick, because when the station started, or right before the station started, while they were scrambling to get the transmitter set up, like Susan had said in the video earlier, Brian actually had the idea at first that we weren't going to broadcast live, that everybody should make cassette tapes. And I was like, oh man, I can do a mixtape, yeah. So I made a mixtape, and they never aired any of those mixtapes that anybody made, because they just immediately went on the air and started doing live DJing. So 6 months went by, and I kept waiting for them to call me to say, you're going to get a show, because, I mean, obviously, right? No, I mean, the thing is I had been involved for a long time, and I was a newspaper critic, and I worked at the big hip record store, and, you know, I was in a band, and I thought, you know, I should be on the air. Well, like I said, there were meetings, and there were meetings, and there were meetings, and there was one particular very, very a big meeting of people yelling. And the program committee at the time, which I remember Susie Gray was on it and Michael Donahoe was on it, and I don't remember who else. They actually sat there. Somebody asked, well, when are you going to get more shows? Because everybody, there were only like, I mean, Ron said 35. Well, that was after I got on. So at the time, there were probably like 25, if that. And you know, somebody said, well, when are you going to get more people? And Susie Gray said, we don't have any more people. And I stood up and said, well, what about me? And Lauren Malk stood up and said, well, what about me? And Emmett McAuliffe stood up and said, well, what about me? And a whole bunch of people who got on the air very soon thereafter said the same thing. And then there was more yelling and screaming. And I remember Chris Merrick in particular standing up and Chris Merrick just going, somebody said, well, who are you? And I'm a volunteer, which he was. So anyway, after that meeting, Michael Donahoe pulled me aside and said, I didn't know you wanted to be on the air. And I said, well, yeah, I do. And he said, well, meet me tomorrow at noon. And he told me the description of how to get there, turn left through the weeds and all that sort of thing. And I was a little bit scared of driving up a gravel road. I mean, I was a county boy. I didn't know anything about this sort of territory. But I got there, and I had my records. And, I mean, I was excited. I was going to get to play a bunch of stuff. And I just grabbed a bunch of records. And Michael met me there. And I guess he had been on the air before I got there. And he just said, this pot is for that turntable. This pot is for this turntable. Here's the telephone. This pot's for the microphone. I'll see ya. I had never, ever done anything like this. I didn't know what I was doing at all, but I had 4 hours to fill, assuming that somebody was going to show up at 4 o'clock. He didn't tell me specifically, but so I did it. And, you know, the next thing I knew, I had a regular Wednesday 4-hour shift to fill, so I split it into 2 shows, the pop quiz and driving jazz. And people often forget that I did a jazz show for over a year and a half, but that was a lot of fun. But we cut that because eventually it really didn't make sense for people to be on the air in 4-hour shifts or 2 4-hour shifts like Artie probably did, or at least 2 3 hours. I don't know. He was on a lot. But also there was no schedule at first. If you remember, you did not know what you were going to get when you turned on the radio. I mean, people joke about that now because, you know, you might hear folk music at one time and blues another time and screaming rock another time. But back then, you did not know who was on the air, what kind of music they were going to play, or anything. It was thrilling. It was absolutely, totally free and exciting, and man, I just loved it. It was a great, great time.
Yeah. So, Art, you had a couple hefty slots to fill, and you told me a little bit about some things you would do to fill your time that wasn't just DJing while you were out there.
Right. 2 days, Mondays, Thursdays, Tuesdays, Fridays, I forget. But it was a lot of fun. And some things have changed, of course. One thing that hasn't changed, when first going out there that first time, I couldn't make up my mind about the music. And so I've drug about 75 LPs out there. And I dragged, I don't know, about 75 LPs to the show just last Friday. I'm still doing that. No cassettes anymore, but CDs. And I see Lee Roth, and I used to get there on Fridays. I think it was Fridays. And after Chris Merrick, did you take, you took Chris Merrick's place, perhaps? I guess so. Yeah, and I knew Lee from the city. He's a musician, a jazz musician, a vibes player, and I had seen him play in his band and more than once, and I didn't know Lee was the person I was going to relieve. And I always thought Lee was kind of an intense guy because when the band played, they really dug in deep. So I get to the top of the hill and lug the records out, and the whole time I'm riding up the hill, I'm thinking I can do this because I'm listening to this music, this jazz music that Lee is playing, and he's reciting poetry, and it's his own, it's his own poetry. I'm pretty sure it is, and I'm going, yeah, man, this is cool, So I get to the top of the hill, and I open up the door, and I open up the door, and Lee is. I was looking for the rest of the football team. Lee looked like he was on a line getting ready, waiting for the ball to be snapped. He was in this crouched position, and he was attacking this microphone, and he's playing this jazz and reciting his poetry. And just, I don't think I could have pinched any spot on him and got a grip, man. I mean, he was into it. He was into it all the way. So anyway, you would get out there, and some of the things that would cross your mind maybe was, man, I can play a song that's 5 minutes long, 10 minutes long, maybe longer. So with that, took a trip up to the tower, and I could watch the sunset. And the phone would ring. We had a phone. We had a telephone, and I was thinking, okay, I got to get back down. And I hear the phone ringing. I get on the phone, and I answer this, and this guy goes, man, how long have you guys been around? I says, not very long. I mean, hardly anybody knew that this radio station was in existence yet, And you wondered who was listening. Is anybody digging this, man? Wow, listen to all this great music. Look at. So this guy's going, man, I'm loving this stuff that you're playing. And I'm going, thanks a lot. And he goes, you know what? He says, and that song there, and that song there, and that song there. And there's this spark of familiarity in this conversation that's, starting to grow. And all of a sudden, this guy goes, what's your name? And I go, Art. Well, long story short, we had been in a group. I had gotten thrown out of a band a while back, before that. And he goes, is this? I go, Art. He goes, Art. And I go, yeah. And he goes, shit. and he slammed the phone down. There you
go. Art always draws that reaction. One thing he didn't mention, we had Roy Helwig and Gannon used to go out there on Thursday afternoons, and they teamed up because one would bring a portable barbecue pit, and one would be out working the hamburgers or whatever else they were going to eat, and the other one would be on the air, and then they would switch off. So it was kind of like a camp-out experience with it. But you saw today a wonderful concert, if you were here for that, with Pokey LaParge. Wasn't that a great experience? This is one of the wonderful things that this station is able to do. I thought from the very beginning, you know what? We can play live music. And it turns out that the reason that people know of this station without the advertising is because of the musicians of St. Louis. When we first started showing up in those RFT polls as a legitimate station, I realized it was because the RFTs were in the bars, and so were the musicians. And the musicians were voting for us, and they all did. And that's why through the years, I've never seen a musician who wasn't supportive of this station, because there's so many people on the air that are players, but we have supported them, and they appreciate it, and we're their friends. It's part of the community, but they will come in support of us. I've never seen anybody that said no in this town to KDHX, but we in a way owe our existence to that, and we've always been involved in live music. The second week I was on the air, I brought an old metal-bodied National, a 1931 metal-body guitar, and this is a different one, and I played that live, and Al Mothershead was there. He was a man of substantial girth. In this little 6x8 room, I was leaned against the wall. I had the microphone in front of me, leaned like this. He was leaning over me, adjusting the board. So I thought, next time I do that, I need a little more space. This was taken 29 years ago this coming Monday. It was May 15th, 1988. I'm standing out in the gravel driveway with our sign. It was our first pledge drive. Larry Weir had told me we had done one where we were not on the air with the pledge drive, but this is the first one where we went and asked for money. And you think of that of all the time since. But that's kept us going, and I thought, you know what? Maybe I could just bring some equipment and get out of the shack itself and play. So I brought a stand and microphones. I worked for the university. I just loaded the car full of stuff, and I thought, you know what? It should work. I don't know if it's going to work. I think it should. And I plugged it in, and sure enough, it did. The man and his wife, who owned the property that we were renting, Susan called him and invited him to this live show outside. And he came and with their grandchildren, and they sat in lawn chairs. And I had a little wooden chair with that stand, with that guitar, playing through an amp and a little mixer. Had no headphones and no monitors. And the show started when the guy in front of me ran out of the shack and went, it's absolutely true, and I started talking. And
Well, we have some audio of that, right?
yes, here's what it sounded like.
Mississippi Fred McDowell always said, I do not play no rock and roll, you understand? Nothing but the natural blues. Starts out with a tune called Highway 61 Blues, which talks about the river road that runs down to Memphis, down to the Delta. Today people take 55, the big interstate, but years ago, actually it didn't seem that long ago, just back in the 70s, you could take 61 down underneath those trees and wind along the river all the way down into the south. You can see it seems like yesterday.
And then what happened?
Well, you know what? I think I'll play that same tune Sunday night, but just as a remembrance. I told stories about people I had known, and as I said, I didn't sing because that would have been the end of us. But this particular moment was the beginning of the first time we had live music for any of the pledge drives. And it was a beautiful evening, and when I heard the tape later on, you could hear the birds chirping in the background. It was just beautiful. And we were just sitting there enjoying ourselves, talking about artists, and I had a little break put together because I had talked to Tom and said, Tom, why don't you come play harmonica and sing, and we'll do the first duet, And so he said, okay. I went over and rehearsed with him, and he said, I'm not going to do it unless you get the guitar really nasty sounding, really, rough, bad. I said, okay, all right. By the time he gets there, you're going to hear him saying it, but let me tell you the real version. The version is he was late. He came roaring up that gravel driveway like a wild man, and we sat there, and the sun was going down. And we were like deer in headlights. I thought, oh my God, he's going to kill us all. That'll be the end of KDHX.
Let's hear Tom's version of that story.
coming down Highway 21, going over the Razorback. I had, was kind of gunning it to get it up the hill, and in the large scale of things, didn't really gun it that hard. Just enough so that when I came to the top of the hill, I was a little surprised by the fact that there were two people sitting in lawn chairs right in the drive. And so I just adjusted the speed accordingly. The acoustics out there are very good, which probably means the sound that my tires made when they, squalled while hitting the unpaved road probably echoed for a half mile or so. And I think it's a tribute to what good and decent people they are, that whatever happened didn't seem to deter them in their support of KDHX. And I think that's the important thing here. That's your takeaway.
That's life and death is what that was. But it was it got dark, and Tom was 2 feet away from me, and I couldn't see him at all. And so we did this just out in the driveway, and we have a little piece of the beginning of that, and you can hear Tom talk. And we did a song called "It Hurts Me Too," an old Tampa Red tune, but he wanted the Elmore style, so my guitar is a little bit loud. We didn't even have headphones, but this was country blues from the country.
Look at here, people. I want everybody to call up right now on the telephone, 664-3688, because the reason I'm doing this is they told me that if I would get up and play some music with Ron Edwards, that they'd get us out of the one-room country shack that we're broadcasting in right now. So please, give us a call, 664-3688. Please, don't give the DJs of this radio station the blues. Next up, Elmore James.
A little bit of the fast for you.
Yeah.